Hey everybody, welcome back to Drilling Deeper. I'm Kevin Yanik, Editor-in-Chief of Pit Quarry. We're going to dig into Episode 9 now. First, let's thank our show sponsor. Again, that is Geologic. Geologic uses scientific investigation and engineering design to provide innovative solutions to the most challenging mining, construction, and development issues in a safe, effective, and cost-efficient manner. When it needs to be done right the first time, call Geologic at 770-824-4212. Thanks again to our show sponsor, Geologic. And let me welcome in Jack Kopanski, Managing Editor of Pit Quarry. Good to see you, Jack.
Kevin, good to see you. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Well, we're not in sunny Florida this time. If you tune into Episode 8, Jack and I were down in the West Palm Beach, Florida area. And I guess we do have sun here in Cleveland today. You know, it's mid-February as we're shooting Episode 9, but it's cold. I think we both probably missed PGA National Resort along with producer Marie, who's behind the scenes here, overseeing the chaos that is our podcast, Jack. But we're going to dig into the roundtable a little bit. But, we're just coming off the Super Bowl, and everyone knows the outcome of that. But, you and I were talking ahead of the show. It's like, what do you do now if you're a sports person? I think our audience knows that they've listened to the introductions here that you and I are both big sports fans, Cleveland sports fans. I mean, this is just the dead period for the sports world.
Yeah. First things first, congrats to Kansas City. Not the outcome I wanted, but, man, you can't deny that is a talented and becoming less fun to watch, but a fun team to watch just with how efficient they are and how talented they are. So good. I'm happy for Andy Reid. That's about where my joy stops for Kansas City. But yeah, kind of like you said, a dead period. NBA is still going on, NHL is going on, but I think we've talked in the past how, at least for us, the NBA kind of ranks third, and it's a bit of a distant third behind football and baseball. I'm not much of an NHL guy myself. I tell myself every year I'm going to watch the NHL, and then I never do. So no different this year. But yeah, I know pitchers and catchers reported. Spring training's going on, so that'll be getting started soon. That'll be fun. But right at this point, I'm pretty much just counting down my days till that beautiful window in March where we get March Madness, the Masters, and MLB opening day. That is like my sports mecca. When you get that 2 weeks of March Madness, you get the weekend of the Masters, and you get MLB opening day. Weather's warming up, sun's coming out, snow's melting away, sports are coming back. It's great. So that's kind of what I've got my eye on. Not a whole lot. Now, I mean, Cavs are exciting. Cavs are doing good. Obviously, we're based in Cleveland. Cavs have been on a bit of a hot streak. So, that's certainly fun to follow. But for people like us that aren't the biggest NBA fans, it doesn't do as much for us as if, we had the Browns to look forward to, or if the Guardians had a 6-game home stretch or something like that. So, yeah, just counting down the days till baseball's back.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. This is the dead period, though. Unless you're a NASCAR person, which I don't think you are, Jack. I'm not, but I was just talking to somebody, in the office the other day about this. The Daytona 500 is coming up. By the time we put this out there, this podcast, I think it'll be about, we'll know the winner, we'll know the outcome for about a week. That's always a fun race, though. I don't know if you get into that, but I can't sit through 200 or 250 laps, but I usually try to tune in for the last 10 or 20 of that because it gets epically good in terms of like the crashes and the competitiveness, trying to get positioning. So do you ever watch that?
I had a period back in probably elementary school, middle school, where I tried to get into NASCAR, and I never followed it super closely. I always had a favorite. My guy was always Tony Stewart back in the day. I think he's doing some commentary or stuff now. I think he's still involved in NASCAR in some way, but yeah, he was always my guy. I had a little bit of time where I followed NASCAR. I'm like you. Every once in a while I'll tune into a race, whether it's Daytona or somewhere else. Maybe I put a little action on the Daytona 500, make it interesting, give me a reason to watch. Yeah, I might check it out, but certainly not the pinnacle of what I'm looking for.
Well, baseball will be here soon. We'll get there soon enough, Jack. Without further ado, I think let's dive into our aggregates talk, our drilling deeper conversation for today. Again, our last one, episode 8, was part 1 of our Pit Quarry Roundtable and Conference breakdown. That was down in Florida, and we're back here in Cleveland, and we've got more to unpack. We're gonna have a lot to unpack here, in the next several weeks, Jack. As the last couple of years you've been a part of our process. Anybody out there who gets the magazine knows that we publish a large report. It's pretty much 40 pages every year. It's a pull-out supplement to Pit Quarry's April edition. And, Jack and I, we moderate discussions at the roundtable each year now. And essentially what we get is a large transcript, probably tens of thousands of words, based on all the discussion that was had during our conversations at our event. And we're going to kind of break down some of the highlights that we didn't get into in episode 8. I kind of went through my notes, and there was a lot that I kind of pulled out for conversation here today, Jack. And just having again talked with you offline after the event, it sounded like you had pretty good conversations, healthy conversations. People are pretty positive overall about where the industry is and where things are headed here, as we're still just kind of drilling into 2024 for the aggregate industry. But kind of digging through my notes, we dug through 7 different topics. I think you mentioned that you didn't get to safety and health in your room. I think I got to all of mine, but for those who aren't aware or have never taken part in a roundtable before, basically we get all of our attendees together for 2.5 hours, and our attendees are producers, equipment manufacturers, dealers, folks from associations. Like we have Mike Johnson from NSSGA, Pat Jackman's been there from OAIMA. So anybody who's invested in our industry, we get them all in a room. This year we probably had about 40 guys, Jack, per room, and, creates a lot of opportunities for different voices to get in. One topic we got into a little bit in our roundtable, was mergers and acquisitions. We had George Redden, managing director from FMI Capital Advisors, on hand. George gives our construction materials market outlook at the roundtable every year. And George, thanks again for being there this year. Interesting that George is kind of setting the tone in our room in terms of how the industry is performing and what's to come in terms of the business elements for this year. And kind of what he had shared is that acquisitions or M&A was a little bit slow to start 2023, and then it seemed like it really picked up in the fall. We saw some big thunderclap deals, and I thought it was even interesting, as we're doing some reporting here at the magazine, even this week, Jack, here in mid-February, that we saw, another thunderclap deal take place with Martin Marietta just the other day, announcing that they had come to terms with Blue Water Industries on a deal that exceeds $2 billion. So while we had a lot of quiet for a while in 2023, it seemed like in the fall, getting into the winter, companies, producers, the big ones in our industry were back and ready to do some real big deal making. And it doesn't seem like we're going to see any stoppage of that at any point either. I don't know, do you guys get into M&A at all in your room as you were going through discussions?
We hit on it a little bit, but I definitely think it sounds to me like you had a much sort of more in-depth discussion about it than we did. I will say I definitely agree with sort of what you heard in your room or what you're talking about. As I know, when I started in 2021, there was it sort of seemed like that was the start of a bit of a boon or maybe a continuation, just at least from my point of view, a start of sort of a boon in M&A activity. And then, for a while, it kind of died down, and there was a lot, and then nothing for a little bit. And now again, we're seeing these big deals with the Martin Mariettas, the Summits, or the Vulcans doing big multi-billion-dollar deals, which is obviously exciting for the industry to see. So hopefully it is something that keeps up, because again, that's always a good sign that the industry's doing well and that people are making money from selling businesses or expanding by buying up other businesses. So, we didn't talk about it, I think, as much as you did in our room, but glad to hear that there's a pretty good sentiment around it right now.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to have George in our room, George Redden in our room, helping to drive some additional discussion on that, coming off of his construction materials market outlook presentation. But Martin Marietta, for example, so they just did a $2 billion deal with Blue Water, and then just a few weeks back, early January, I think it was mid-January, Jack, they acquired Albert Fry & Sons. It's a big operation, or a big company, with operations in Colorado. And we just saw that the USGS put out another top 100 list of crushed stone producers, and they ranked Albert Fry & Sons as the 50th largest producing company. So, these are big companies acquiring other pretty big companies. And I guess maybe just to put a bow on the M&A detail that kind of came out of our room in George's discussion is that in uncertain times, the producers, buying and I suppose selling too, like they tighten up. They just stop and wait. They're cautious. And it's interesting too because the economy isn't exactly perfect right now. The cost of doing business is still pricey. Capital's expensive. I think we're expecting the Fed to lower rates at some point. Maybe not in the immediate future, but sometime in the months to come. So that might allow for some more deal making. But the fact that we're seeing these big deals come forward, I think that, like you said, that bodes well for the industry. People are confident. And I think just the whole M&A side of things shows that things are going well right now for our industry, at least in one respect. Also, my notes here, I've got a slew of things that I'll probably run down that came out of my roundtable, Jack. But we talked about the kind of population shifts as a driver or not a driver of aggregates consumption in across the country. Stuart Petrovitz from Route 82 Sand and Gravel, he's out of Poughkeepsie, New York. Stu's been to our roundtable a few times. He's a smaller producer, again, out of New York. And, he talked about kind of what was happening in New York State, how people are fleeing. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody in our industry. You see some of the high-tax states like California, there have been population, people moving to the south, to the Sun Belt, Texas, the Southeast. So I think those are some of the drivers in terms of, what's happening with M&A, for example. Martin Marietta with their Blue Water acquisition, they just mentioned that, that kind of gets them into some key growth markets in Miami, I think was one, and then Nashville being another. I think some of their deals get them into Knoxville as well. So whereas you see some, big producers, for example, like Martin Marietta with that deal with Blue Water, seizing opportunities to get into high growth markets, into markets where population growth is happening. We've talked about South Carolina on the show in the past, Jack, and how, that's a high growth state. And, that's probably the reason why the South Carolina Aggregates Association is seeing some good momentum, down there in the Southeast. But, just to kind of bring Stu Petrovitz back in and, what's happening in New York, he's, on the other side of the coin, where there's not people, there's not necessarily as much, demand or drive to do projects, big projects, not as much support necessarily for infrastructure. And again, I think what I'm talking about here with Stu, on the negative side of the coin versus some of these other high growth markets, is a reminder that aggregates is a very local market and not everywhere is going to be performing, at high levels as others, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of a story you did a couple months ago, or actually it was two stories. Your conversation you had with Steve Zelnick and
Brian Full.
Brian Full, yeah, I know. One or both of them kind of talked about how they, were in a spot. I think one of them did actually come from New York, and talked about how they were there, opportunity was there, and then they ended up, the opportunity wasn't there anymore. Headed down to, was it South Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
In Brian Full's case, yeah.
Yeah, so just hearing you talk about that brings that again to my mind, where it's like obviously that's not a new phenomenon, and I think that just shows the some of the willingness to adapt that this industry has, and they're like if we've run this well dry, we're not afraid to go and find somewhere that we can test our luck and hopefully find some more opportunity. So very, very interesting to hear that. It's kind of almost funny to hear people leaving New York when it's like, from a non-aggregate perspective, it's like, New York's this place that has everything, but obviously not always the case.
Yeah, even talking to Stu in the past and some other producers, about New York State, it almost seems like New York City is just the driver of everything. And then, it's probably one of the bigger geographic states in the country. And I feel like producers, elsewhere in New York kind of feel forgotten. It's interesting, too, not to make this a political thing, but, I mean, New York City kind of thinks one way and, many parts of the rest of the state, think another. From my point of view, too, if you've got population leaving, makes you wonder if you're going to see other producers, giving up or kind of like dwindling their interest in certain states, kind of like Brian Fold with Sunrock did, years ago, moving down to North Carolina and identifying where the high growth markets are. But, if producers are going to leave markets, that leaves potentially more opportunity for the producers remaining behind it to seize, whatever's left and get a bigger piece of the pie. Maybe it's a smaller pie, but maybe your fraction of the pie could be a little bit bigger, I suppose. The election, we drew that up as a topic for roundtable discussion this year as well. Jack, I'm curious what you got out of that in your room, or if that's something that you guys talked about at all. It's interesting, every 4 years, and it's gotten trickier, the last several years too, because people bring emotion into it, with the election. I think it's interesting to see too that, people maybe are getting a little bit of fatigue, whether you think one way or another, that don't want to talk about the election and the impact anymore. But maybe before I go too far down the road, did you guys get into that at all in your room at all? And I guess what thoughts did you have on some of the discussion that was had about it?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the idea of election fatigue. That's something I'm familiar with from my previous job that I, when I was working at a newspaper back in 2020, obviously there was a lot of talk about it then. And, a lot of people just kind of felt like, again, like you said, didn't want to talk about it. At this year's roundtable, at least in my room, it was a very similar sentiment. I kind of threw out an election question or two, crickets, crickets, crickets. And then someone ultimately piped up. They're like, Jack, we're tired of talking about this, man. Like, ask us something else. And I kind of gave it a second, and we really didn't. I don't think anyone outside of maybe a comment here or there, we really didn't talk about the election. We had some good conversation about some world events going on. The conflict over in Israel and Palestine, Ukraine and Russia, China and Taiwan. Just a bunch of different world events. And kind of how that's affecting, be it supply chain or, accessibility to different parts or equipment. But yeah, the election was not a friendly or well-received topic in my room. So we didn't have a whole lot of talk about that. But yeah, was it different for you? Did you guys end up talking about it a bit more?
I wouldn't say we did talk about it a little bit. It's always interesting to me. Politics I've always found fascinating, I remember just taking political science classes when I was in college. I think the process is interesting. I think just the environment that we're in now, it's not the one that we were in when I was in college 20 years ago. And I've had some personal fatigue from just kind of where things are. I think a lot of our readers or listeners have as well. But whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump, the industry should still be able to perform. That was kind of a takeaway that I took from our conversation. Whereas I would say in past roundtables, there was a lot more desire to have one candidate be the president versus another. This year, I think we would like the candidate to be on our side, in terms of the potential legislation to come. But I think producers are more ready to fight regulation today. It's not the ideal environment, I guess, given some of the candidates you could argue, and just some of the, the dialogue that's being had, it doesn't seem constructive, and that's kind of what producers have shared with me. But I think we've shown, the last 3 years that we've been able to perform. Maybe it wasn't at high levels, the volume levels that we had, in 2018, 19. We did get an infrastructure bill, a federal bill in 21, and that here is where in 24 is starting to take effect. And, that was a talking point of our discussion at the roundtable, that the producers who are tied in with federal projects are expecting, this year to really be a good year for non-building, for roads, bridges, and highways, for federal stuff, especially as we're seeing some residential dry up or slow down, and things like data centers and warehouses, in the non-residential construction segments start to taper off a little bit, although we're seeing manufacturing take off. But again, I guess just to kind of summarize what I kind of captured in my room is that, people weren't really getting consumed with the process or the election process, but they realize that they're going to have to function one way or another, whether it's Trump or Biden, and it seems like they're ready to do that.
Yeah, and I think, and I guess just my final thoughts on at least the election are kind of, since we didn't really talk about it a lot in my room, you look at the conversation you had with Mike Johnson at the roundtable, and I think what you mentioned kind of stuck out to me from at least what he said, as far as, you talk about how there wasn't necessarily a lot of vitriol toward one candidate or another as far as how it would impact the industry. You know, I know in our at our 2022 roundtable, I think a little bit in 2021 as well, you know, we were still embattled or embroiled in the waters of the U.S. discussion of how that was going to plan out. You know, it was, you know, Biden was in office. You know, there was a lot of discussion about how that was going to work, how that was going to look. But, you know, this time again in Mike's conversation, and I think we even talked about this, you know, after the roundtable, is that, you know, it was a lot of, there were praise for both Biden and Trump for the different things they've done for the industry, and there were criticisms of Biden and Trump of what they've done to affect the industry and or the economy and or, you know, the country. So I do agree with you that it feels like we're at a point that no matter who wins from an aggregate industry perspective, fingers crossed, knock on wood, doesn't feel like there's going to be any major changes over the next 4 years.
One producer I had in my room at the roundtable, Jack, was John Scepaniak. John's been at the roundtable for, gosh, I think 5 or 6 years in a row. He might have missed one. He's been there at least 4 or 5 times, I would say. I was fortunate a couple of years back to get up and visit one of his operations, and John was gracious enough to sit down with us while we were in Florida at the roundtable. So let's hear a little bit from John based on some of the things that we queued up for producers to chew on down in Florida. Hey, everybody. Kevin Yanik with Pit Quarry, back on Drilling Deeper. And we've got special guest John Scepaniak from WD Scepaniak. We're down at the Pit Quarry Roundtable, and we've got John back for the 6th time. That's kind of hard to believe. John, thanks for being back.
Yes, absolutely. Glad to be back down here. You guys keep having them in Florida. I'm going to keep showing up.
Well, I feel like they've all been in Florida minus those COVID ones. You probably joined us in North Carolina when we were at, oh my gosh, I'm already forgetting the property.
Nashville.
I think it was, yeah.
It was in
I think
Nashville.
it was a Biltmore property, and then we had it at Chateau Elan in Georgia. You were there as well?
Yep.
Okay. Well, yeah, glad to have you back. And so we've got John, you know, here at the PGA National Resort. It's in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, and it's the day before we officially do our roundtable discussions. So we basically chalked up 7 different topics, you know, for our producers and attendees like John here, and you know, really just want to kind of catch up with John because he's been a loyal reader to us, not only on Pit and Quarry, but also on portable plants. And we've got a lot on the table to talk about at the roundtable here in Florida, but maybe just tell us some of the things that you guys were working on in 2023. I know you guys are, you know, looking to expand and trying to chase down projects and put materials on the ground. You know, where were you guys in 23? You know, what sorts of projects were you taking on? You know, maybe 1 or 2 that stood out in 23.
Sure. So our bread and butter business of aggregate production on a contract basis and aggregate transport and delivery has really, over the last 15 years, taken us from our hub of Minnesota into the Dakotas, Iowa, Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska, and beyond. It's really interesting looking back on the last 10, 15 years, how much we've grown and expanded our footprint. It's been really exciting, and I don't think I could have predicted it to play out as it did. Really what that is just a sequence of answering the call and saying yes when you have customers that present you with projects and challenges, maybe a little bit outside your comfort zone, a little bit beyond your typical boundary, taking them on and just realizing that it's the same principles, the same process, just applied in a different area. Been really good for us. So 23, in hindsight, in the midst of it, seemed like a very challenging year. There was a lot of curveballs in terms of projects, equipment, and things like that really were unforeseeable. But in addition to that, in hindsight, it really was the best year ever. We took on a lot of projects that were maybe outside of our comfort zone, as well as we drew internally and did a lot of work closer to home. It was a good year. You know, we had a lot of fun, and there's a lot of good stories to reflect on.
We even saw you at Dirt World in Houston in October, I guess it was. They probably had 800 people at that event, and I thought it was you know, really well done. Kind of interesting. I hadn't been to an industry event quite like that where they were talking about people, and we were talking, you know, kind of offline at that Dirt World Summit about, you know, your interest and how you're trying to approach the people thing that our industry has been trying to tackle and solve a little bit over the last several years and building up people. But it seems like you guys are growing, and you know, you've got kind of a special approach that you're trying to take in terms of, you know, molding people and, you know, putting them on different pieces of equipment, you know, just some of the things that you shared back in Houston. So maybe you want to offer a little bit of input too on your approach to kind of building people up, because it's been a challenge for our industry for a while here.
Sure. Yeah, I would say from early on, I had a gut feeling that people were going to be the X factor for your company's success or failure, rather. The equipment's the same, financing's the same, projects are generally the same for your companies, no matter where they are and what they're doing. But your people is going to be what's going to really drive success or failure. Given that, I've put a lot of emphasis on talent acquisition, talent development, talent retainage. BuildWit really had a good push for that as well. That's kind of what their company's founded upon. And I like that, and I grabbed onto it and shared a lot of ideas with them. What we're doing internally for some of those things, this is old news now already. Brought on a full-time recruiter, and for a company of our size, that was kind of a stretch. It was like, well, this seems like maybe more than what we need, but it's yielded tremendous benefit, and I would never want to go back to life without it. I think just as you have somebody procuring parts and equipment, you need somebody procuring people. On that note, on the development side, you spoke about it, and I've talked about this before. I have a little bit of an unconventional approach to putting people in positions where I think they can succeed. You need to remember, when somebody comes to your company, they have infinitely variable level of experiences and skills, and you can't really quantify a lot of that. So it's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot of just what you know about the person, what they present in an interview, what their resume or track record has, and just try them out. We have some baseline procedures, like the front end loaders, our bread and butter. We'll put a guy in a 980, see how he does. He's either going to take to it. Shortly after, we'll get him in a 988. From there, we're talking maybe in as short as 6 months, start pushing him into some crusher operation, or maybe dozer or excavator, if that's kind of the path they're following. And there's times where you need to pull the reins back on somebody for whatever reason, but it's just a lot of kind of hot potato, trying this, trying that, seeing what sticks. Some guys enjoy the variety. Some guys don't love it. A bit unconventional, but it's worked well for us.
I feel like we've talked in the past, maybe it was a formal interview or otherwise, John, about, ConExpo as an opportunity, or trade shows to, get people out there and step up into different types of leadership roles. ConExpo was just, I guess, 11 months ago now, in Vegas. You were there, and you mentioned you're already looking ahead to the Ag 1 2024 in Nashville. Saw a lot of trends from my point of view at ConExpo last year. I feel like we talk a lot about electric equipment, which I don't know that necessarily resonates with producers and contractors at this point in time, because we're so diesel oriented. Some exciting things coming in autonomous hauling, and ConExpo is kind of that place every 3 years where things converge, and we see, macro trends start to form. And, it's kind of exciting that we're seeing this digitalization of the industry as well. So I'm curious, as you reflect back on, about a year ago, going to ConExpo, what did you kind of pull out of there that you were able to, utilize in business, today? And what's your expectation for Ag 1 here? Because that's coming up, at the end of March.
Yeah. ConExpo is becoming increasingly hard to digest. I do enjoy it. I will keep going, but I do feel like there's a point where it's just, there's so much going on. It's hard to take it all in. That's why I like Ag 1. Ag 1 is a little bit scaled down, actually substantially scaled down. And what it allows us to do, our priority when we go to Ag 1 as opposed to ConExpo is more of just a spectacle in my mind. It's just like to kind of be wowed and overwhelmed by all this wild, crazy stuff. Ag 1 is where we really get the boots on the ground, and if there's an ancillary product offering we want to get into, we can meet with 3 different manufacturers of that machine, ask them the hard questions, and get a real answer. Whereas with ConExpo, it almost seems like there's so much going on. You spend so much time just bumping into colleagues or customers. It's a big social event, which is great in and of itself. But Ag 1 is where we really focus on equipment procurement and technology.
Yeah, the footprint of ConExpo, I hear that from the producers who are walking it. The manufacturers too, because you're out in the gold lot or one of these far off places, and they want to see you in Aggregate Central. One thing that they did do a little bit better this year, and got some perspective on this, is it seemed like they centralized some of the aggregate stuff a little bit better into the central hall, some of the more key areas that people would be frequenting. So, but I can't disagree with you at all. I mean, how do you cover that thing in a week? Do you spend the whole week out there? Or?
Yes. Yep. Usually what we'll do is we'll come maybe a day or two before and stay a day or two after. But for the same principles, I like Florida. It gets me kind of out of the Minnesota winters.
For us too, I could tell you from a coverage standpoint, we can't do it all in a week. We've got multiple editors that are going around trying to consume all the latest equipment, technology developments, whatever it is that a manufacturer, service provider is trying to offer, and we just can't cover all the ground. One thing they did last year that was kind of cool was they created a Media Monday. So the day before the show, we were able to kind of cover more ground, a sixth day of the show, because I guess it goes Tuesday through a Saturday typically, and so we're able to add a Monday onto it, and it helped us consume a little bit more content. But you're right, I don't know that there's any way to do it best. I don't know that it's necessarily going to get any smaller, though. I think, if anything, it might get a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I think they've created a monster, and I don't know if they can reel it back in. But it's a good show. Like I said, we'll keep going. We'll keep bringing our people. It's just a very, very enjoyable week.
Well, John, maybe a sharp transition, because you guys are probably doing a lot of private work, and I would imagine that the private side's kind of ebbed and flowed. Whether it's something on the residential side or non-residential. It seems like the federal stuff's been kind of holding up all of the construction market or construction materials. But what's your view right now on how the private side is faring? Is it healthy? Are you satisfied with the amount of projects that are out there, or is there room for more?
Yeah, I think our customers have enough of a variety of end use to where they're able to insulate themselves from any ebbs and flows in the private market, whether residential strong or commercial strong or whatever. We've seen a continuous uptick in demand for our products throughout the private sector, which is good. I really don't have a ton of faith in tons of state or federal projects keeping our company afloat. We saw this probably 10 years ago when we primarily did, state and county and township projects. But I think if you wait for, the funding and things like that to come through, and then you're doing kind of low bid work, speaking from our business, it's not a super viable solution. There's companies that thrive on public work. We just don't.
Do you want to put a number on, any percentages that you're doing on the private side or the public side, or
Sure.
for
Yeah.
23?
I would say, in 23, if you look back, there's some caveats with that. So how much of our material is produced for a private customer that sold it to another private customer that used it on a public project? I don't have those statistics, but I would say, just speaking of us as a contractor to a customer, transactionally, it was probably 90% private, 10% public.
Okay. Do you have any reservations about things that may come this year? We've drawn up some kind of interesting topics this year about, what's happening with inflation and, the impact that's having on companies to go about securing financing, or, I think we've been talking about the potential of a recession for the last 2 or 3 years. And I think some economists would even say, yeah, like we kind of had one, or it was mild, or others are saying, yeah, it was close, but it's not. And I think maybe that's still kind of swirling a little bit if there's potential for, for an economic dip or a recession to surface. But, are there any events, like major events that have you kind of on the edge of your seat thinking that maybe things might take a turn for the worse in 24? Or are you more optimistic, would you say, when you kind of look forward and thinking what the next 11, 12 months have in store for you guys?
Yeah, I'm optimistic because I think when you look back at our history, some of our most successful years as a company were in like 2008, 2009, 2010. They were really transformational for us because you had those severe changes in your typical markets, we'll call it, and it forced you to think outside the box and be like, okay, well, this work's not coming through. This is where my sourness for public work is coming from. This work's not coming through. It's not happening. Well, we need to figure something else out. And that's where you lean into private projects, whether that be renewable energy infrastructure or just, e-commerce. There's projects to be had everywhere, depending on the economy. I don't think you put all your eggs in one basket and hope for the best. I think what you do is you control what you can in terms of, fuel purchasing and acquiring financing and staying ahead on your consumables, but then really just constantly being aware of what's going on and just don't be scared to pivot.
As the cost management side of business been a lot more challenging? I know it has, but I guess how would you describe keeping up with inflation the last year or two? And, prices are going up, and, we've heard from producers who are trying to regularly keep tabs on their own prices to
just stay in line with everything and keep things in balance. And, it seems like things are maybe getting a little bit better there in terms of the adjustments, but I can imagine if you're looking for a crusher or, you're selling materials for the last year or two, you probably had to have a little bit more feel for where the costs are going in the business. Is that fair to say? Or?
Yeah, I would say we're past the hard part. A few years back, right in the midst of COVID, there was a lot of price increases on really everything for us as a business that we needed to adjust to, and we had a hard time mentally passing those on to our customers. But as you had some of those conversations, some people were like, hey, we're all in this together, let's make it work, and you just kind of dilute that across scale, and it's not such a burden. But then you lose some smaller customers along the way, and that's okay. That's just business. And I really think that we're past the hard part of it. Customers understand that every year there's probably going to be a marginal price increase, but that's to help us mitigate increased costs on consumables and fuel and things that really we as a contractor don't have control over. So it's good. There's a good sense of understanding across the board.
John, any final thoughts? As you look ahead to 2024, things that you're excited about? What's happening with the company?
Yeah, I would say every year we get a little bit better at what we do specifically. I spoke on this earlier, but just looking back in hindsight 10, 15 years ago, I don't think we'd believe we are at where we are today. And that gets me excited for the next 10, 15, 20 years. We have a really strong group of people, and I just really, really love what I do, and I think that makes it a lot easier. If I had a hard time going to work every day, it'd be pretty miserable. But I really enjoy aggregates. I really love this industry, the people in it, people I work with, our customers. I mean, it's just great. I can't really imagine myself doing anything else.
I was going to ask you one more question, too, because we have your brother Brian here at the Pit Quarry Roundtable for the first time. I mean, there's a lot of family companies in our industry. It's kind of one of the things that makes our industry special. It's an interesting industry because you've got, a lot of consolidation taking place. Some of the big majors are just getting bigger and bigger. That's continuing to take place here in 2024. But there's still a lot of family companies, mom and pops and, everything in between. But just wanted to ask, too, what's it like working, with your brother, with your dad? You're a third-generation company as it stands now. Can't imagine that's necessarily always easy, but probably a lot of blessings in there as well, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to, some of my old college friends about this because there's a lot of skepticism about me joining the family business. Well, shouldn't you go work somewhere else and gain some outside perspective? Yes, for some people, that's probably a great idea. But for me, I'm very glad I came on board when I did. Family business, I would advise against it. Anybody looking to get into it or join a family business. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek because I think it can be one of the most rewarding experiences, and I'm tremendously thankful that my family provided a foundation for me to build a career on. Really there's a level of trust that I don't think you can't necessarily buy in a corporate environment. Knowing that, my brother and my cousins and my dad were all really focused on the same things and pushing in the same direction, I think that's a huge contributing factor to allowing us to scale to the level we have in the time frame we have. And once again, it gets me excited for the future because we're all very excited about where we can take this thing. And none of us are worried about getting out of work early on Friday to go do XYZ. We're working late. We love what we do, and it's just a very exciting thing to be a part of. And it's exciting for me to bring Brian along with as well, and kind of show him what is out there outside of the business and different anecdotes and things we can kind of pull from other contractors, implement within, and no, it's good. It's very fun.
Yeah, I think part of the growth of anybody, whether it's our industry or not, I could say so for myself, is going to events like this, going to trade shows, just talking to people, because I think you gather intelligence, you gather ideas, and then you can kind of sift through all that and react and make decisions. For us, I think it's great to be able to bring people in and for content purposes, but just to kind of enhance my own knowledge because it's a great industry, and to have a third generation company, I think studies even show that doesn't happen a lot. Fourth and fifth, even less so. So that's a dynamic to be commended. And John, really appreciate you being here with us. Hope you enjoy the roundtable here in 24, and love to have you back in 25. Don't know where it's going to be at, but hopefully you'll join us, whether it's in South Florida or Arizona or somewhere else.
Yep, barring any personal crisis, I'll be there.
We'll look forward to it.
That was John Scepaniak. John, thanks again for joining us at the roundtable. Always appreciate your support of the event and being there. It's great to see Brian there as well. So hope to see you guys at Ag 1 here in another few weeks.
Yeah, John's a veteran at this point. John's awesome. I had him in my room, my first 2 roundtables. Very smart guy, very great contributor. Had Brian this year, also had some good stuff to say. So glowing reviews of both the Scepaniaks from Pit and Quarry.
We'll have to get them back in 2025. That'll get them, to 5 or 6 for John, I guess, in terms of roundtables he's attended. Well, Jack, I wanted to queue up at least one more topic. Is again, we covered a lot of ground in both our roundtables this year. I think on episode 8 we talked a little bit about the industry's standing with people, whether it's the public or job prospects. But I was going through my notes, and I know you had some additional fodder you wanted to share on episode 9 here today about industry promotion and how we need to do a better job as an aggregate industry in terms of leveraging the things that we do, the benefits we provide. And I even kind of singled out a few different comments in my notes. I guess maybe just to summarize what I'm about to say by individual, we need to do more to, we have a great industry. We bring a lot of value in it to a lot of different people, to this country. But people just don't know what we do. They don't understand the nature of, why we exist. And some of those sentiments were really well articulated in my roundtable room, Jack. Scott Alexander, for example, from Summit Materials, when we were talking about, promoting the industry better, he said, 90% of the people that he encounters, they don't know about the industry at all. And, man, when I think about that, 90%, that's unfortunate. We need to get that number down. We were talking, too, just about, encountering random people out and about in the world. And, another attendee, we had Peckham Industries, Damian Murphy, on hand for the second year in a row. And, he talked about when he's sitting next to people on airplanes, for example, rather than telling people that he's in the aggregate industry, because people don't know what that is, he says to people, like, we tell people that, we're building civilization. That probably gets people to pause and stop and realize, man, like, that is an essential industry. Like, whatever they do is really important. Nick Schur from Sherco Slurry, he was in my room as well. He talked about how the public's perception of what we do is they see this evil thing. We see that through NIMBYism and other groups that just don't want us around. But we are essential. If you value the way of life that we have in this country, we are essential, and we're not evil. I think there's a case to be made that we need to do a better job of telling our story. Then one more sentiment from Jamie Jones, another 2-time roundtable attendee, like Damien there. He said, it kind of goes to show why it's so important to educate the people making the laws and regulating you. Because if you let the public and, the naysayers or those who say that you're evil, dictate the conversation, we're not going to be regulated in a way that is friendly enough. We're not going to get the legislation passed that's favorable to our industry. So those are just some things that stood out to me, some notes that I jotted as I was kind of moderating my roundtable around the discussion about industry promotion. Jack, what did you pull out of that conversation?
Yeah, I heard a lot of the same stuff. There were a lot of comments that basically, to sum it up, were, it's great what we're doing now, getting into schools, trying to spread our message as best we can, whether it's through vocational programs, getting to kids at a young age, whatever producers are doing or whatever industry members are doing, it's great, but it's just not enough. And it seems there also seemed to be something of a, not to over dramatize it, but there was a level of what felt like concern of what do we do from here, where it kind of feels like there has been this sort of set game plan where it's like, get into schools, talk to the young kids, talk to kids going into college, talk to kids at vocational programs, host quarry tours, again, have, work with legislators, work with community members. But this perception just remains and remains, and it's so hard to get that view of this industry off of us. And it's going to take probably doing something that hasn't been done before. And, no matter who you are, whether you're a massive publicly traded producing company or whether you're a small mom and pop quarry in Wichita, Kansas, it's scary trying to do something new because you don't know if it's going to work. So there was just a lot of general feeling of like, we need to do more if we're actually going to change this. And I think one of the biggest things is changing that message, because for the second time in 3 roundtables now, I can't remember exactly what it was, and I'm kicking myself for it, and I'm looking forward to seeing my roundtable room transcript to remember exactly what it was. But for the second time in 3 years, someone brought up the impact that they had by seeing some kind of PSA, whether it was on TV or on social media, promoting some type of industry. Where is that type of messaging? Where is that type of education for the aggregate industry saying, hey, even something as something like a commercial where, it could be a car driving down the road and then all of a sudden the road just disappears. Buildings just crumble. And it's like just something to really get that message across that we're not the bad guy. You need us. You may not want to need us, but you need us. And the sooner that we can get kumbaya about all this, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's a topic we're going to dive into a little bit more with future podcasts. I've got a lot of planned notes here that we could probably scatter into a future episode of Drilling Deeper as well, Jack. But let's leave the roundtable discussion there. I wanted to kind of just get into what we're working on at the magazine at this point in time. Again, it's mid-February as we're shooting this, and it's February 27th is the air date that you'd be hearing this at the earliest time if you're just waiting for this podcast to drop. But, right now, internally, we're working on our March editions, those being Pit and Quarry, of course, and Jack's the editor-in-chief of Portable Plants Magazine, our quarterly sister publication, focus on portable crushing, screening, processing of not just aggregates, but, recycled materials. And it's a busy time with magazines right now because, we're putting together, at least on Pit and Quarry, it's, I guess, our biggest issue of the year. We do have a buyer's guide that we published in October, and I think in terms of the number of print pages that is in that one, that one's the largest, but a lot of that is the buyer's guide. But, with this being our Ag 1 show issue coming in March, it's probably the most editorial that we're planning. So I've been busy, putting a lot of content together for that. And I know you've been doing the same with Portable Plants, Jack. What can readers expect from Portable Plants March at this point? Because, Portable Plants we don't really talk about on the program a whole lot. And, Jack and I were talking ahead of time, that a lot of our, readers on Pit and Quarry aren't even aware that we have a sister publication, in Portable Plants. So, Jack, this is your moment to promote that, I'd say.
All right, here we go. Portable Plants. Like Kevin said, certainly been a busy first quarter already for everyone on the Pit and Quarry / Portable Plants staff. In Portable Plants March, we're going to have coverage of C&D World. I was down there for a quick stop before heading over to the roundtable, so we're going to have some coverage of that event. We'll have a preview of Ag 1 World Asphalt. We have submitted features from freelancers Mark Battersby and Phil Perry. Mark looks at different ways businesses and operations can get financing, while Phil looks at ways to manage toxic or disgruntled employees. We've got submitted features from TCI Manufacturing and PPI looking at washing safety and conveyor trends, respectively, I believe that is. And obviously, the latest in equipment and technology in the portable realm. So a lot of good stuff. Been putting a lot of work into this issue. I'm very pleased with how it's coming together. So, when you check out Pit and Quarry March, grab yourself a copy of Portable Plants March as well, and see what we've got going.
Yeah, anybody going to Ag 1 can grab copies of both March issues, Pit and Quarry, Portable Plants at the Pit and Quarry booth. I think there's also going to be a showcase where you can scan a QR code on the show floor at the Music City Center in Nashville. And if you want to read our publication digitally, you can do that. Your website, jacksportableplants.com. On my side, on the Pit and Quarry side, anybody going to Ag 1 is going to want to pick up our March issue because we're going to have our must-see exhibits supplement. It's something we publish every Ag 1. We also do a version of that for Con Expo. So if you went to ConExpo last year, you picked that up. You probably found it of value as you're looking for aggregate-specific exhibits at ConExpo. But basically, the must-see exhibits supplement that you can expect this year, ahead of the show. It's just a guide to help you navigate the Music City Center trade show floor. There's probably 30 or 35 sponsored pages there. Everybody featured in that supplement to the magazine is actually exhibiting at the show, so you can get a sense of some of the equipment you're going to see, some of the concepts that are going to be on display. We're also going to be in the main issue for Pit Quarry talking about the NSSGA annual convention. I'll have the opportunity to attend that along with Rob Fulop and Dino Vitanza, who are also on the Pit Quarry staff. Recently interviewed the incoming chairman of NSSGA. That's Martin Marietta's Jim Nicholas. So, you can read kind of his outlook on the year to come and, what he's going to be trying to drive on behalf of NSSGA. That's also going to be in the March issue. We also, we're at the point in time, too, where we're seeing a lot of the fourth quarter reports emerge. I don't think half of them have come out yet. I think maybe I've seen 4 or 5. Martin Marietta's just came out today, actually, as we're doing the podcast. And, Ward and I, he's always got some commentary in their financial report. This time, again, talking about the fourth quarter and the full year for 23. And I think he called it, the best year in the history of Martin Marietta. Martin Marietta, again, being the number 2 crushed stone producer in the country. So, that is obviously very positive sentiment coming from, from an industry-leading company and, in the head of that company. So we'll have more coverage of that, in the March issue. In addition to that's kind of what we're putting online right now is a lot of those reports. So if anything, we're busy at the magazine right now. We're thinking about episode 10 already, Jack. I know you just mentioned you're going to the GCA event. I'm going to miss that this year. I know you're going with Rob down to Atlanta. I think you're going to enjoy that. That's the first time you're going to their management workshop. I think I've been to SME a few times. It's always a big show, not necessarily aggregate specific, but I think you and I were, again, talking offline and thinking, well, we'll probably have some fodder to unpack from those two travels that we're going to have, and some more roundtable stuff. Some other things will probably surface that we can get into on episode 10. So look for that, into March, I suppose. But hopefully, if you're still listening, you enjoyed episode 9 of Drilling Deeper. And for Jack Kopanski, I'm Kevin Yanik. We'll see you next time.